Hello, and welcome to Recall This Book. This week, we are rerunning an episode from last season on women and political office, dedicated to Elizabeth Warren. Our conversation is with Manduhai Buyandelger, an anthropologist from MIT. Please stay tuned for future episodes with Peter Brown on medieval money, Christine Desson on money as political agreement, and Vincent Brown on the Caribbean, the Atlantic world, and war. Thanks. From Brandeis University, welcome to Recall This Book, a podcast that looks backward to see into the future. Our idea is to assemble scholars and writers from different disciplines to make sense of contemporary issues, problems, and events. And we try to do this by looking at books that shaped the world that we have inherited. Today, our hosts are John Plotz. Hello, John.
Hello.
Elizabeth Ferry. Hello. And we're joined by Manduhai Buyandelger. She's the Associate Professor of Anthropology at MIT. She's the author of Tragic Spirits, Shamanism, Gender, and Memory in Contemporary Mongolia, which is published by the University of Chicago Press in 2013, and winner of the Shu Book Prize from the Society of East Asian Anthropology. Manduhai is currently researching women parliamentary candidates in Mongolia. Welcome, Manduhai, to our tiny, soundproofed salon.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Today we're going to talk about a topic that's been coming up quite a bit in the U.S. news recently, women and political power and women politicians. We've been hearing quite a bit about Nancy Pelosi, AOC, and the range of possible female candidates for president who seemingly can only be compared with each other. Today,
Which you just did.
Which I just did, right. We're going to curse it. We're going to take a broader swath beyond the U.S., though. We're going to go from Argentina to Mongolia to Zambia. And we're going to pick up some Hillary Clinton and Margaret Thatcher along the way. So with the exciting prospect of hearing about your work shortly, Manduhai, we thought we'd go in chronological order today of powerful women in politics. What I would like to bring in today is a book by Tomás Eloy Martínez, who's an Argentinian writer, who wrote a sort of part novel, part reportage, part surrealist confection called Santa Evita, which is about Eva Perón. And the book is a combination of interviews with people, journalism about Perón, and also a kind of long, extended story of what happened or might have happened to her body after her death. It is, in fact, true that her body was thought to have disappeared and cropped up in a bunch of different places. There's a lot of mystery surrounding it. Also that supposed relics of her body, pieces of hair and nails and things, were sold, sometimes embedded in jewelry. And the book kind of riffs on this in some interesting ways.
And hey, Elizabeth, for those of us who are sort of amnesic or not that good at history, can you remind me of Eva Perón's dates, like when she was in power and also, birth and death and all that?
Yeah. So she was the wife of President Juan Perón, and she was the first lady of Argentina from 1946 to when she died, which was in 1952. She was born in 1919, so she died quite young of cancer. A lot of her power, which was undeniably political, was very much located in her body and in her image. Yeah. She was a kind of not very good actress who was from the provinces and thought of as not particularly attractive, and then was kind of made over, and particularly, and probably people listening have an image of her with her kind of almost Grace Kelly-ish blonde, perfectly coiffed hair.
We can do side-by-side photos for the website.
We can do side-by-side photos, yeah. So, for instance, one of the parts of Santa Evita has a description from her hairdresser. And I have to say, I don't know how much of this is a fictionalized description, but it kind of gets at some of the issues. So her hairdresser is quoted in the book as saying, "I lightened her hair little by little. I used stronger and stronger dyes. I did her hair more and more simply because she was always in a hurry. I had a hard time convincing her because she had worn it loose all her life. Before she knew it, Evita was already different. I made her, he repeated, I made a goddess of the poor chick I first met near Mar del Plata. She didn't even realize it. So I think this kind of, raises a question about what kinds of power women are allowed to have in politics or not. So.
Yeah. Well, since we know we're heading to Clinton, there's also the family connection to think through, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah. So one of the things that Evita is famous for is meeting Juan Perón, who became her husband, in a public setting and, saying things which were quoted in a bunch of different ways, including thank you for your life. So I don't know how this might connect to questions of family and authoritarianism.
Oh,
and
well,
power.
that's an interesting connection. I was actually thinking about the opposite, which I was thinking about Thatcher as self-made woman. So I don't know. Again, I mean, thinking about where HRC exists in this question of powerful women who are connected with powerful men before them. Because one thing about Margaret Thatcher, I was not prepared to talk about this, but her husband Dennis is famously a figure of fun in England in the 1980s because he's the first man, basically. So there's comics that just show him basically sitting around, I don't know, doing the dishes or fishing. Those are the things I think that Dennis was seen to be doing. So I just
and with
wonder,
an apron on, I think too, right?
Yeah, I think that's right, actually.
Yeah.
So I'm just wondering about the glamour of power, the way you're describing it with Eva Perón and successive waves of blondness, because Thatcher's power is exactly antithetical to that. It is frumpiness personified, kind of like Queen Victoria or Queen Elizabeth, that she works by her plainness.
Actually, both Queen Elizabeths.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, maybe. No, I think the first Queen Elizabeth was a little bit more glamorous, but yeah. So the authoritarianism line that Elizabeth is referring to is the book that I chose to talk about. Is an amazing book called Iron Ladies by Beatrix Campbell, and actually the subtitle is Why Women Vote Tory. So it's a book that's primarily not about Thatcher so much as it is about the gender gap in British and European politics more generally in the period she's writing about, which is the 70s and 80s, and the way that the gender gap tended to favor conservative parties for female voters. So that's the premise of the book, but then she talks about Thatcher as the apotheosis of this kind of Iron Lady mythos in England. And so the book comes out in 87, at which point Thatcher has been prime minister already for 8 years and is going on. So you could think of Thatcher and Reagan as being roughly comparable, strongly conservative figures in a society that had always called itself a liberal society, but had social democratic impulses, which both Reagan and Thatcher are fighting against.
And they're both sort of epoch-defining.
Very epoch-defining, absolutely.
Yeah.
So, I mean, if you think about British popular culture out of the 80s, if you think about, My Beautiful Laundrette or Sammy and Rosie Got Laid or, any of those defining films, the story is always about Thatcherism. Love it or hate it. And in some ways, My Beautiful Laundrette, I think, actually it's implicitly pro-Thatcher because it has a soft spot for kind of entrepreneurial, small business diversity, which is what Thatcher represents. But the other thing that Thatcher represents, and this does connect.
It's the nation of shopkeepers, right?
Well, the nation of shopkeepers, right. Like child of a shopkeeper, she's very proud of that. But also, Beatrix Campbell has a wonderful line, which is that Thatcher reunited a party divided since 1945 on the basis of, quote, the marriage of moral authoritarianism and economic liberalism. So I think, there's so many things to be said about what Thatcherism does on the authoritarian side as well as on the liberal side. But I think since we're talking about it in terms of the gender of leaders today, I guess one point worth making there is that the moral authoritarianism is articulated as coming out of a family-based authority. Like, in other words, she always represents herself as incarnating the virtues of the family. So I thought I would just quote probably Margaret Thatcher's most famous line. In England, sort of this is what people will quote at you with Margaret Thatcher. I mean, besides this lady's not for turning. But the famous speech she gave in 1987, it was an interview in 1987, she said, they, meaning basically whining Labour Party members, they are casting their problems at society. And there's no such thing as society. There are individual men and women, and there are families, and no government can do anything except through people, and people must look after themselves first. It is our duty to look after ourselves, and then also to look after our neighbors. So I I think the wrinkle that Thatcher brings is that, on the one hand, like Reagan, she incarnates a strong form of neoliberalism, like a sort of Republican in American terms, adherence to the logic of the marketplace, the invisible hand of the free market. On the other hand, she really anchors in this notion of authority coming out of the family. And I think that the fact of her being a woman enables her to kind of present that.
That was going to be my question, and then sort of wondering, like, do you see ways in which she's using that?
Oh, yeah. I mean, the pocketbook, as you said, the Nation of Shopkeepers, I think she absolutely, she uses that. People, one of the things that people called the Labor Party's vision of a robust social democratic institution-filled society was a nanny state. Right. And Thatcher was basically like the anti-nanny by being just like this strong, sensible house marm kind of figure. So I do think she's playing that very much. And Campbell has this wonderful chapter where she says basically Thatcher gets to be a man when it suits her to be a man and a woman when it suits her to be a woman, and that's not a role that a male politician can so readily play. Do you know what I mean? Like that.
Yeah, it's interesting though because it feels like that's one of those cases where being female in politics opens up a broader range of possibilities, whereas we see a lot of cases where it's a narrower range.
Yeah. No, absolutely.
Yeah, which I don't know if that is a good intro into your work, but we would love to hear about it and then hear your thoughts.
So the book I wanted to talk today is by Hillary Clinton, Hard Choices, or at least the book that I want to start with. It is an autobiography, which is different from the book that is written about her, and she has a voice, very strong voice. She has written several books, and this one is, I think, is very unique in the sense that she wrote this book it's published in 2014, and she chronicles her work as a Secretary of the State.
Right.
It's not about glamour. It's very little about the kind of power that she feels and embodies and experiences as something like a public persona or something that she can delegate and feel empowered. It's very much about the work.
Doing the job.
And there is very little gender in it. Or what does it mean to be a woman, a Secretary of the State? It's just about the choices she made, the difficult situations that her staff or United States was in, and she needed to figure out very quickly on her feet what to do. Some of the situations are very bizarre and funny, such as like during the time when Aung San Suu Kyi was arrested and was during the house arrest. An American Burmese man who became infatuated with Aung San Suu Kyi broke into her house. And so the American side had to deal with it and things like that. And it's amazing how much of innate wit and quick thinking, friendship, all kinds of official and unofficial sort of powers and thinking she needed to summon to make decisions and to get out of the situations. So Hillary Clinton doesn't talk about what does it mean to be a woman, what is gender. It's more about the position of the United States within the world and what she could do to improve the situation and things like that. And this book needs to be read or at least thought about in the context of other books that she wrote and other sort of publications that are written about her. Her latest book, which is titled "What Happened," and it is about the election.
The 2016 election.
Is very much about gender. What does it mean to be a woman and to be talked as a woman and to be measured by all kinds of people.
Right.
And
well, that's sort of the underlying argument of her. Like I haven't read the book, but from what the reviews and things and interviews, it sounds as though her answer to what happened is primarily misogyny.
Oh yeah,
right?
absolutely. So she has multiple voices, and the thing in her work, her book Hard Choices kind of speak to my work about women in Mongolia who are parliamentary candidates and who talk about themselves in a sense, not as gendered beings per se, but as people who can do work.
Right.
Not necessarily a gendered work. They're not necessarily shaping themselves or claiming to have more insight in running
or moral authority,
or running like the Department of Children and Mothers or something like that. They claim to have equal sort of status, and whether that's they're doing strategically or whether that's just in general the different kind of understanding of gender and feminism, that's a different question. Right. But I'm glad to have this.
Before you go on, I just want to, can you tell us a little bit more about the context of that work? Because I think it's so fascinating.
So I am an anthropologist, right, and doing an ethnography, writing ethnography about women parliamentary candidates in Mongolia. And during socialism, so Mongolia was socialist until 1990. It was Soviet-style socialism. Women had a quota in high positions, including in the national parliament, and they had 30% representation in over 400 people National Assembly. That was kind of forgotten or jettisoned during the end of socialism, and by 1990...
Was that typical of other Soviet-style republics?
Yes,
have a gender-based
it was typical.
Quota?
Some places were able to maintain that because of the strong feminist movement, but most places kind of, it just melted away.
Right.
Right. So, but then the fight to reconstitute that quota was very hard. And in 2008, prior to 2008 elections, women won. Women got approval from the parliament to have 30% quota seat for the candidate quota for the parliamentary elections for
so
women.
Not necessarily elected, but candidates,
but they lost, and they had to work again for the next 2012 election to reconstitute it. But what I'm trying to say is that when 2008 candidate quota was abolished without any explanation by the government, by the parliament, and it coincided with the time when electoral campaigns became highly commercialized and became very expensive. During that time, most women were challengers, were outsiders, the candidates, and they also didn't have as much money as some of the incumbents or some of the other men. So what has happened is that women had to rely on who they are, right? Who they are as people, as gendered beings, as their education, their background, everything like that. So that's what I write about, and that's why Hillary Clinton's book is so important, because many of these Mongolian women were capitalizing on their skills and what they could do.
Right.
What is the highest post that a woman has had in the Mongolian government?
President of the country.
Is that a ceremonial post or a real post?
Back then, it's a real post. Yeah. So I forgot the years, but it was the widow of the
family
first
connection.
president, Sukhbatar's wife. So, but that was long ago, and it's a very small period. And even though it is actual position, back then probably the power was limited.
Yeah. And in the more recent, the post 1990,
more recent Speaker of the House.
So that's a powerful role then.
Yes, it is. It is. Speaker of the House. So, but women's positions have always been challenged, right? And so 2008 election, women gained only 3%, 5% or something like that. So it's an ongoing process.
Well, can I ask if was there about Speaker Oyun, is that her name?
Yeah.
Yeah. Is there massage? How was she depicted in public? Like, does she get some of the grief that American female candidates get? Like, is she accused of being, I don't know what, you know.
So Ayun is a special case.
Uh-huh.
She was elected to the parliament. She gained the parliamentary seat because of an unusual tragedy. Her brother, who was the leader of the democratic movement and who later became a candidate for the prime ministry, was assassinated in 2006.
Oh, so there's shades of the Gandhi family then.
Yeah. So, and she was one of very few women to be in the parliament for a long time. And by the time she became a speaker, I think she gained this reputation of being this model, the morally intact representative of the parliament, partly because of her brother, but also mainly because of her public image. But she also has critics who says that she doesn't do much.
Yeah.
But then if there are women who try to do a lot and they get into trouble because there are different people who talk differently about what things that
looks
people
like.
do.
Yeah, I mean, the morally pure figurehead, that's a traditionally female role. Like, we can think about a lot of, like, historical politics in which being moral and kind of above the fray is coded as female.
Yeah.
So,
Right.
Exactly.
And that's definitely true for Evita.
Yeah.
Right.
This is all making me actually think more about how impressive Thatcher is in this context because of the ways in which she actually goes against some of those norms of, you know, being brought in through family ways or like coming in as a figurehead. Like she came in as a scrapper.
And
I mean,
also,
I hate her politics, but it's very admirable, like in terms of how she found her place.
She's incredibly savvy. I mean, one thing that, and let me just ask you if this is one of the reasons why you're intrigued by the book Hard Choices. It sounds as though what you're saying about Mongolian female parliamentary candidates is that they're, on the one hand, kind of not really supposed to talk about the fact that they're women, right? And kind of, you know, there's this language of, you know, it's all about the job and this is, you know, I'm the best one for the job.
Morality.
Yeah.
But at the same time, and I know this partly from your work, and this also kind of, in a sense, it puts together, you know, what Hillary's talking about it in Hard Choices and in the later book, they're having to fashion themselves constantly and work on themselves as women, right?
Yes, no, absolutely. And
we should put up some of the photos from your article, your recent
sure.
article, Manduhai, of how people self-present.
And maybe you can
It's
give
really,
some examples
oh,
about
absolutely. So Margaret Thatcher is an example of sort of polishing, self-polishing, the styling for older women and.
So she's a model for them?
She was.
For
older women. So in the 1990s, early 1990s, people knew much about Thatcher and they tried to dress like her. And the suit was very fashionable.
The helmet hair.
The helmet hair, the kind of jewelry that she wore. And
interesting.
The scarves she wore that people try to emulate.
That's
with the newer women, 2000 plus parliamentary candidates, are amazing in the sense that they treat their bodies as pliable, endless resource. They change their voices from trying. They take lessons from singers, opera singers, and they utilize latest technologies of anti-aging and beautification. But
and a lot of work with color too, right?
Absolutely. And the trick is to be good looking without being sexy, right? To be liked without inviting too much. And that's very hard. And they do it really well. Through clothing, through
That's
everything.
totally fascinating. The voice question is fascinating also.
So if you could describe what is the ideal voice that they're aiming for, like in terms of pitch or accent.
And then we'll all try to do it.
Okay. Yes, in keeping with our
one of my informants, a former who was a candidate for a long time and then an MP, member of parliament, Ms. Buyandelger, who is a celebrity writer as well, writes novels, and one of the first people to actually translate her novels and get her novels on the Amazon for English and French speakers. she took some advising from both international as well as domestic advisors of how to create the electable persona.
Right.
So her voice is a little too high pitched. It's a little shrill. So she needed to make it.
Oh, shrill. That's one of those words.
Right,
Shrill.
yes.
Right.
Shrill and
So-
strident.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
And it's very hard to apparently listen. She was told it's hard to listen to her for a prolonged period of
Right.
time. So she took classes for 2 years with the singer to keep her voice, to thicken her voice.
Yeah, enrich it. Make
Enrich
more-
it and make it lower in tone.
Uh-huh.
And that
Just take testosterone.
Yeah.
and that was amazing because I was very puzzled when I was sitting in her office, and with me she would just talk what seemed to be a very feminine voice.
So she code switched.
Yes, she did. So she
Yeah.
would have higher pitched voice with me, and then her assistants came
Yeah.
to ask questions, and
Yeah.
she delegated the task to the
Yeah.
assistant. And
Yeah.
the assistant was a young woman, and she practiced her
Okay.
electable voice.
And
Yeah.
she said, "I'm practicing my voice,"
No,
or
I-
she just
didn't say
did
that.
it.
She did it.
She just
Yeah.
do this. I mean, I can't
Yeah.
imitate it. It was do this and that, and
Right.
this needs to be done this way. Blah blah blah. She gave
Right.
instructions in a different voice, and then
Yeah.
she turned within
Yeah.
a second and talked to me about other things in what seemed to be higher pitched voice, and I
How
couldn't understand why she was
interesting.
doing until she explained this to me, and I was like, of course,
Yeah.
Okay.
of course,
Yeah.
it makes sense.
Yeah.
So I just listened to that podcast about Elizabeth Holmes. I think I'm getting her name right. This imposter from Theranos who just sort of bilked people out of billions of dollars. And one of
Yep.
the things people are obsessed with is that she changed her voice, so that in college she had her own female voice, and then she darkened and deepened it.
Yeah.
Right.
And when you listen to her, she never broke role. That's the amazing thing about her, is that she kept. So
Yeah.
there was something about the way it was used as the gotcha in the podcast that did feel a little weird to me. And having this conversation
Right.
is sort of helpful because it's like shrill and strident are like the undesirable characters of
Right.
the voice, and then dark and authoritative is the desired character.
But also maybe
But-
that, like,
But if you're a woman who has a dark and deep voice, then you're putting something on.
right, and also
Yeah.
that the voice, it might be one thing to change your color of lipstick or your
Right.
clothing, but somehow the voice is like the locus of authenticity.
Exactly,
or something,
because
right?
it exists somewhere in between the body and the external world.
Right,
External
Yeah.
world.
Yeah.
So
it's really
working on that
interesting.
is, and I mean, you see that, now you think about things having to do with class, right? The idea of people who take lessons to reduce their class.
Right, there's so many different types of passing.
Right.
And then
Yes,
so that
exactly.
you get this character, and and it's definitely true in the trans community that the question of voice recognition is a huge issue.
Right.
Like being heard on the phone is a dangerous space if you're a certain kind of trans person, because you might be identified as having your birth associated voice and
As opposed, right?
yeah, right.
Yeah.
So
Uh-huh.
yeah. But but Manduhai, your formulation of like being I think the phrase you used was like good looking but not sexy. Is that right? Like not
Yeah.
attractive but appealing or something like that, or
Right.
You're
It's
good
like a
looking
really-
enough, but not
yeah.
necessarily inviting too much.
no
Or at
come
least-
hither, right.
At least not in an overt way, because this is important for these parliamentary candidates. It's very important to look dignified and yet very attractive.
Totally.
Right.
And not to be filed as trophy wives or misses or beauty pageant, but then look not worse, not
Right.
any less than that.
Right.
Totally.
Right.
So I think
Yeah.
right. So I think in the American tradition, great people to think about would be Barbara Mikulski, who was just short and just never made an effort to be like glamorous at all. But she kind of came on to the scene. I don't know if she was married, so I won't call her a housewife, but she came on as like a middle-aged activist. Like that's how she
Right.
appeared on the scene. And then Claire McCaskill, who was the wife of a senator and then had to establish her own independent identity, which I think was very, I'm going to call it dowdy, like Thatcher-esque. But that other category you're talking about, where you're actually willing to be good looking and like
Right.
appealing to people, but without
think that's
being
the sort
coded
of
as sexy.
Anne
you know.
Richards
Yeah.
category, right? So elegant.
Totally. But the person I was thinking about was I wanted to ask you about childbirth in office, because I was thinking about Jacinda Ardern from New Zealand. Do you guys know her? The Labour Prime Minister from New Zealand, who's a young woman and had her first baby right after being elected, basically. Yeah, she's an environmentalist. Yeah. She paid for her own travel. She paid for her partner and her baby when she traveled because she didn't think it was right, to just there's so many things to love about her. But I mean, she clearly navigated that question of being like, I have a female body, I'm pregnant, I'm about to have a baby, but it wasn't. So she was interested in looking good. Like she talked about how she wanted to wear nice shirts, but not sexy good.
Well, I'm also thinking about the, some of the stuff that's coming out around Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and her, she dresses, too nicely. Those, they seem too fancy for someone who's supposedly from a modest background.
Right.
But at the same time, I mean, I was reading one thing that said, if you're a woman in politics in the United States, there's like you're either a battle axe or a pretty nitwit, right? And she's sort of
and she's neither of those,
right? So but she's always tipping into the pretty nitwit.
So basically, people are irritated because they can't class her,
right?
Yeah.
So that's a big issue, I think, in politics. Is that so? In Mongolia, when the quota question came up again and again, another question followed, which is. What constitutes an electable woman, right? So there is the de facto person in the parliament is male. So what kind of women we want to see? That became an issue. So people try to classify exactly like that. Is this pretty? As this grandmotherly? Whatever. And so women whom I work with who want to represent, they have to navigate. Some, of course, just go without paying too much attention.
Right.
And those people remind me very much of this Hillary Clinton's book about. They talk about what they're going to do. Yeah. Right? And not all of them, but many.
But so of course, to be a politician, I'm so sorry to interrupt. I mean, but to be a politician is to think about how you appear in public. Like you can't,
you can't avoid it.
You can't avoid it. Like there's no. I mean, maybe if you were a wonk technocrat, that's fine. Like that's what you are. But if you're a politician, I mean, JFK and Nixon both had looks. Like
and increasingly there's there's an entire industry around the cultivation of political candidates, right?
Totally. But the thing that you're talking about, Manduhai, I think that's so revealing because the word I've heard used in political discussions is what lane are you running in? Like so in other words, what is the specific thing you offer? Which could mean it could mean a set of policies or it could mean an appearance.
Right.
And like for example, with Elizabeth,
like a brand.
Like a brand. But with Elizabeth Warren, what I heard people saying about her post-Clinton is like, oh, well, she can't win because look at what Clinton did in that lane. And it's like, it seems so insane to me because Hillary Clinton and Elizabeth Warren occupy totally different lanes policy-wise.
Yes.
So the only thing you could mean by that is that they're like women of a certain age who project a certain kind of competence.
Right.
And that's...
Yeah, they're like middle-aged or late middle-aged white ladies, right?
Like
that kind of lane.
Like Warren's problem is Bernie Sanders. Like that's a big problem. But the idea that her problem would be that Hillary Clinton lost, like that's so maddening.
Yes, indeed.
I'm going to go back to Kennedy again. Like he was a Catholic running in a country where a Catholic had never been elected president before. So what he had to do was a little bit shift the image of what an electable person was. Right. Again, he was very concerned with how he looked, and that was part of it.
Well, and he had to shed the Al Smith, I guess, right?
But
people's memories.
Totally. Right. So there's legacy you have to shed. But like in terms of the candidates you're looking at, do you see people figuring, okay, here's the existing role, and this is what I have to do, or do you see people imagining themselves in like is there the possibility of proving to people that there could be a different lane, a different look?
John, it's so dynamic.
Yeah.
And the ways in which women are allowed even to compete in the within the party, different political party platforms, is more or less negotiated and orchestrated. What these women are gonna represent, who they're gonna defend. Are they gonna cover for some difficult situation for other men, or not like with their bodies, but like to kind of soften the the difficult media situation or difficult corruption cases,
or a particular policy.
Right. Oh, so they're like moral cleansers.
Some of them, and some of them are they just have very important appeal, right? And some of them are just to help others to get up. So they assign different roles. So what is important, what I learned from elections in general, is that there is no like black and white winners and losers. It's such a multi-step, long-term process that even losers behind the curtain have a chance to reshuffle their positions.
Yeah.
So some, candidates know that this time they may not win, but there will be another chance. But in order to do that, they have to rehearse their craft.
Right. And also there must be sort of, as there is in all kinds of places, like you have my back this time, and then I'll have your back some other time.
That's why it's so negotiated.
Right.
And when women might come with their sort of ideas of what they're going to do, and then they have to work around what their parties or what their situation might dictate and maneuver around and change a little bit, which could be good and could be very undermining as well.
Let's turn to our section of the episode on recallable books. That's where we ask all of us to think of things that might be exciting for people to look at further, or that might take your thinking on these questions in different directions. So maybe I'll start with you, John.
Oh, sure, yeah. So I'm going to stick with the Thatcher theme for the evening, and I'm going to recommend Hilary Mantel's story called The Assassination of Margaret Thatcher, which is in a book called The Assassination of Margaret Thatcher. I cannot do justice to this story in a brief period, but it is a fantasy or a fictionalized account of an assassination attempt on Thatcher, and it carries this intensity of hatred, the way that the left and the right are so divided around Thatcher in England, during the time of her, what I want to call her reign. But it also involves like Irishness and the way that Irishness stands for violence in the English context. And there's just a lot of kind of stereotyping, like Mantel is kind of playing with the way that we make easy assumptions about how somebody is because they're Irish, how somebody is because they're a woman, how somebody is because they're British and hence theoretically not capable of killing one another, but the idea is maybe we are. So it's a fantastic story. So that's my recommendation.
Great, thank you. Well, so speaking of stereotypes, I'm going to be stereotypically anthropological and bring in an ethnography called Iron, Gender, and Power, Rituals of Transformation in African Societies by Eugenia Herbert. This is a kind of a survey or a comparison of a number of different, particularly Central and West African contexts where the ritualization of ironwork as a male activity and a politically powerful activity, but one that kind of makes use of ideas and images of childbirth, so that the forge is, very clearly, metaphorically, this kind of image of a woman's body, of a vagina, of birth. But women
just
are
like
not.
In Great Expectations.
And pain and labor.
And pain and yes, emergence and all these things, generation, and power. But it's only reserved for men, right? So it's at one point Herbert says something like, female power is recognized, but it's appropriated or assimilated.
Yes. That's a nice line.
Yeah. And so that, I don't think everything's like that. I certainly don't think everything in the societies that she's describing or other societies is like that. But I think this notion of, what is the idea of female power? What are women supposed to stand for? What kind of work do they have to do in politics? What kind of work are they not supposed to do? And how their power and their bodies might be connected or separated, I think is a fertile, so to speak, line of inquiry.
Amazing. I can't wait to read both of these books. So I do recommend, even though it's a huge book, Hard Choices by Hillary Clinton, and just to really sort of think about women's work as work, right? And not just like, all the other things that women do in order to get to the power, but like the work when they are powerful. And as because this book is autobiographical and it might be too close and Hillary Clinton might be too familiar, etc., etc., I would like to recommend an exotic book and a small book and a more popular kind of book by Jack Weatherford, who is an anthropology professor at Macalester College, Mongol Queens. How did the queens contribute to the empires in Eurasia back in 13th century and 14th century to rule to rule
That's
one
great.
of the biggest, some of the biggest empires back
That's
then.
interesting. Yeah.
That's wonderful. Okay, well, thank you so much, Manduhai, for
Yeah,
joining
so
us.
much
Thank you,
for having
Manduhai.
me.
Great
Yeah, this was great.
conversation.
It was
Yeah.
awesome.
Yeah. Okay. Recall This Book is the brainchild of John Plotz and Elizabeth Ferry. It is affiliated with Public Books and is recorded and edited in the Media Lab of the Brandeis Library by Plotz, Ferry, and a cadre of colleagues here in the Boston area and beyond. Our music comes from a song by Eric Chaslow and Barbara Cassidy, Fly Away. Sound editing is by Claire Ogden, and production assistance, including website design and social media, is done by Matthew Schratz. Mark DeLello oversees and advises on all technological matters, and we appreciate the support of University Librarian Matthew Sheehy and Dean Dorothy Hodgson. We always want to hear from you with your comments, criticisms, or suggestions for future episodes, and you can email us directly or contact us via social media and on our website. If you enjoyed today's show, please be sure to write a review or rate us on iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcast. And you might be interested in checking out past episodes, including topics like opiate addiction, old and new media, an interview with Madeline Miller, author of Circe, and a conversation with living legend of science fiction Samuel Delaney. From all of us here, thanks for listening today.